When brilliant Dr. Adiz gives up her career for the man she loves, she expects partnership. Instead, she's silenced, mocked, and discarded like trash. Humiliated and penniless, she buys a lottery ticket with the very $20 he throws at her, and wins $5 million. Now he wants half. But what begins as a legal battle becomes something deeper, a war for dignity, truth, and justice. Because this time, Adiz isn't fighting for a marriage. She's fighting to reclaim her soul. And the man who buried her? He's about to learn that some women don't just rise, they come back untouchable. Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The emergency room was a battlefield that night. Thunder rolled outside like an omen while nurses ran back and forth, their shoes squeaking across the bloodstained floor. Dr. Adiz Okonkwo stood at the center of it all, calm, precise, unflinching, as the trauma unit wheeled in a new case. The man had been involved in a violent crash on the expressway. His body was drenched in blood, his ribs fractured, one lung partially collapsed, and his pulse fading. His ID read Chaik Madhu, a name she'd never forget. As she stood over him, commanding her team with confidence, she saw something in his eyes through the blood. Not fear, not panic, but a strange, silent trust. Maybe it was delusion. Maybe it was surrender. But whatever it was, it gripped her heart for a brief second. Then she pushed it aside and began surgery. Hours passed. The surgery was brutal, requiring swift precision, a blood transfusion, and repair to a punctured artery. One slip, and the man would have died. But Adiz was not one to falter. Every stitch she placed was, with prayer and science intertwined. Her hands moved like they were born for this, steady even under pressure. When it was over, her gown soaked and her eyes heavy, the team erupted in low cheers. The man had made it. As she stood outside the theater, breathing in the scent of antiseptic and steel, she didn't expect the emotion that hit her. She had saved hundreds before, but this one felt personal. Maybe it was how young he looked, or how lost. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the feeling that their stories had somehow collided for a reason. She brushed the thought aside and told herself it was just another successful procedure. But it wasn't. Over the next week, while Chaik recovered in the ward, he kept asking for the doctor who saved me. The nurses teased her about it, but Adiz laughed it off, until the day she walked in to check on him, and he greeted her with a weak but charming smile that disarmed her defenses. "Dr. Angel," he called her. "Are you sure you're not part of the surgery team in heaven?" She chuckled, amused by his boldness. But what struck her more was his wit despite the pain. He thanked her profusely, told her how he'd been on his way to close a small business deal when the accident happened. "Maybe it was God's way of slowing me down to meet you," he said with a grin. Adiz shook her head, amused, but something inside her stirred. She didn't know it yet, but that one operation would change the course of her entire life. Discharged after a week, Chaik didn't vanish like most patients. Instead, he showed up 2 days later at the hospital with a box of thank you cupcakes and a handwritten note addressed to Adiz. "You didn't just save my body," it read. "You reminded me how fragile life is, and how beautiful it can still be." It was dramatic, maybe even corny, but Adiz couldn't help smiling. The gesture was unexpected, the kind of sincerity she rarely encountered in a world full of fleeting appreciation. She sent him a polite message thanking him, assuming that would be the end. But the next week, he returned with takeaway coffee and offered her a seat outside the hospital garden. "Dr. Angel deserves a break," he said, and with a laugh, she joined him. That was the beginning of something neither of them could name yet, but both felt in their bones. They began to talk, not just once, not just casually. What started as chance coffee breaks became intentional meetings. Chaik would ask about her shift, her past, her dreams. And Adiz, despite her professional composure, found herself opening up. She spoke of growing up with strict but loving parents who wanted her to marry early. She shared how she fought to be a doctor against the odds. Chaik shared his own struggles, how he'd started his business from scratch, how he'd been homeless once, and how he hated being pitted. There was a fire in his voice that matched her own drive. Their conversations grew deeper, and their laughter became easier. His presence started to feel like comfort after long, tiring days. For the first time in a long while, Adiz allowed herself to imagine love, not just a fairy tale, but something real and flawed and beautiful. It wasn't long before Chaik asked her out on an official date. Adiz hesitated. She had always been cautious about mixing love and work. But the way he looked at her, with admiration, not possession, touched a place in her heart she hadn't known was waiting. On their first dinner together, Chaik surprised her again. He didn't boast about money or success. Instead, he asked how she handled grief after losing patience. He watched her, not just with his eyes, but with his soul. "You're not just brilliant, Adiz," he said. "You're light." That night, something shifted. She didn't just see Chaik as a patient anymore. She saw him as a possibility. Her friends warned her to slow down. But for once, she wanted to trust what her heart was whispering. And slowly, the line between doctor and lover blurred into something deeper than either had planned. Months passed like wind through a valley, steady, quiet, but undeniably shaping everything. Chaik became a regular part of Adiz's life. He would wait outside her hospital shifts, take her to lunch on her off days, and surprise her with flowers and warm words. The hospital staff teased them relentlessly, nicknaming him Mr. Recovery. He was warm, protective, and romantic in ways that reminded her of storybooks she once read as a girl. He didn't just love her, he adored her. Adiz, who once believed she'd marry medicine alone, began to believe in forever with him. On her birthday, he took her to a rooftop dinner under the stars. As violins played in the background and fairy lights blinked around them, Chaik knelt down and asked her to be his wife. "Let me take care of you," he said. "I don't want you stressed or overworked. My queen should rest while I conquer the world for us." Adiz was stunned, not just by the proposal, but by the depth of love in his voice. Her friends were thrilled. Her parents were surprised but pleased. Still, a part of her hesitated. Medicine wasn't just her job, it was her identity, her calling. Could she really walk away from it? But Chaik reassured her gently, "You've done so much for others. Let me do something for you. Let me build so you can breathe." It was hard to resist the picture he painted, a peaceful home, shared dreams, laughter without burden. She told herself she could always return to work later, that this was just a new chapter. With a hopeful heart and tear-filled eyes, she said yes. The engagement photos went viral on social media, Dr. Mary's her patient, and the fairy tale felt like it had finally begun. The wedding was grand but intimate. Adiz wore white lace and walked down the aisle with her heart full. Everyone applauded the union. During the vows, Chaik promised never to dim her light, to honor her sacrifices, and to build an empire in her name. It all sounded like a dream. A man she saved, now vowing to save her from struggle. After the honeymoon, Adiz turned in her resignation. She packed up her scrubs and stethoscope with bittersweet pride, placing them gently in a memory box. Chaik smiled and told her, "You'll never miss them. I've got you now." Adiz believed him. She believed in them. But what she didn't know was that buried under Chaik's devotion was a seed of control waiting to grow. And soon, the hands that once held her gently would be the same hands that cast her out. The day Adiz officially turned in her resignation letter was heavier than she expected. Standing in the hospital lobby for the last time, she watched the bustling of nurses and doctors like a ghost among the living. Her white coat, which once felt like armor, now hung loosely on her arm like a memory too sacred to fold. Colleagues hugged her, some cheered, others whispered concerns behind her back. "You sure about this?" Dr. Musa asked quietly, his eyes kind but skeptical. "You're one of our best, Adiz. You were born for this." She smiled politely, her heart doing somersaults of doubt, but she responded with the same line she had rehearsed for weeks. "I'm starting a new journey with my husband. He wants me to focus on our home and his growing business." It sounded noble, traditional, even admirable. But as she dropped her ID badge at the front desk, her hand lingered, almost as if her spirit refused to let go. At first, the change felt like rest. She woke up to sunshine instead of emergency calls. She no longer smelled of disinfectant and sweat. Chike took her on long drives, bought her soft robes, made her smoothies in the morning. He'd come home in the evenings with new plans, contracts, and accounts to celebrate. Adiz smiled, nodded, encouraged, even hosted dinners for his business partners. When people asked what she did, she'd smile and say, "I used to be a doctor. Now I'm a full-time wife." Some women envied her. "You're lucky," they'd say. "My husband would never let me rest like this." But deep down, Adiz missed the beat of the hospital, the sacred chaos of saving lives. She tried to write medical blogs, even considered taking an online course to stay sharp. But every time she brought it up, Chike frowned. "I thought we agreed. I don't want a stressed wife chasing patients. We're building something different now." She buried that voice inside her, the one that screamed every time she walked past her stethoscope in its memory box. Instead, she poured herself into Chike's life, his outfits, his meals, his calendar. She made herself small to fit the mold he wanted. When he praised her for being the kind of woman men dream of, she clung to the words like lifelines. At night, she prayed for peace to settle the restless ache in her chest. "This is love," she told herself. "This is what I chose." But a tiny splinter had lodged in her soul, one that whispered, "If this is love, why does it feel like loss?" And though Chike hadn't raised his voice, though there were no bruises, something invisible was tightening around her, inch by inch. She just didn't know yet. It was the slow beginning of erasure. They moved into their dream home 9 months after the wedding, a tall, elegant duplex tucked in one of the quieter parts of the city. Chike spared no expense. Marble floors, gold fittings, imported chandeliers, even a walk-in closet Adiz never asked for. He posted every milestone online, from car crashes to castles. "My queen and I are unstoppable." The house was beautiful, almost like a hotel. But as Adiz walked through it, her voice echoed in the halls, and she realized just how silent everything had become. Chike was now always in meetings, always on calls, always coming soon. Phone in hand, laptop on lap. "Sorry, babe," he'd mutter when she brought dinner. "I just need to reply this deal." She smiled and walked away. That became their routine, her presence fading into the walls while his success filled every room. Her parents visited one Sunday, bringing soup and conversation. Her mother looked around the house with narrowed eyes. "This is lovely, my daughter. But how are you really?" Adiz smiled too quickly. "I'm fine, Mama. Chike is good to me. He's working hard, and I'm supporting him." But her mother didn't blink. "You were made for more than support, Adiz. You saved lives. Don't let love turn you into a shadow." Her father chimed in gently. "We love Chike, but promise us you won't forget yourself." She nodded, dismissing the ache those words stirred. After they left, she told Chike what they said, hoping he'd reassure her. Instead, he scoffed. "Your parents need to understand their lane. They don't know what it takes to build wealth. They should be proud you're resting, not whining about your past." Adiz nodded slowly, but said nothing. That night, she cried quietly into her pillow, wondering when her opinions had started feeling like offenses. Soon, the cracks became wider. When she suggested they renovate the guest room into a library or workspace, Chike frowned. "For what? So you can sit there and pretend you're still a doctor." His words stung, not because they were loud, but because they were laced with contempt. He started joking in front of guests that she was on a permanent sabbatical, then added a laugh that never reached his eyes. She began to feel like a trophy, polished, positioned, and paraded, but not spoken to. When she asked if they could pray together like they used to, he brushed her off. "You're too emotional these days. It's starting to irritate me." Her heart broke a little more. The man who once held her hand during rainstorms now made her feel like a burden during sunshine. And as the days rolled into months, Adiz's silence grew heavier than any diagnosis she had ever delivered. It happened quietly. One day, Adiz was walking through the market when a young boy collapsed near her feet. Panic erupted as people screamed for help. Without thinking, she dropped her bags and knelt beside him, checking his pulse, clearing his airway, stabilizing his breathing with practiced movements she thought she had forgotten. When the ambulance arrived, the EMT looked at her and said, "You're a doctor, right?" Her throat tightened. "I used to be," she whispered. But that moment awakened something long buried. She went home that night and dug out her medical books, dusted them off like sacred scrolls, and cried. The next day, she reached out to a small non-profit clinic on the mainland that served underprivileged families. They were thrilled to have her volunteer, even if it was part-time. For the first time in years, Adiz felt alive again. She didn't tell Chaik. She wanted to feel the joy without defending it. But secrets don't stay hidden long. One evening, Chaik saw a note she left on the fridge, clinic outreach at 2 p.m. Back before dinner, his smile turned to a glare. "What's this nonsense?" he asked coldly. Adiz tried to explain, excitement in her voice. "It's a volunteer role, love. Nothing full-time. Just a few hours every week. I missed the work, and it felt good to help." Chaik cut her off with a bitter laugh. "So now I'm not good enough to fulfill you? You need 6 strangers to feel important again." She stood frozen, unsure whether to shout or shrink. "It's not like that," she said softly. "I gave up everything for us, Chaik. But I also need something for me. Just a little part of who I used to be." He slammed the table. "You're disrespecting me in my own house. I said I didn't want my wife working. And now you're sneaking around like a rebellious teenager? What next? You open a hospital behind my back." He forbade her from returning. And that night, the warmth between them turned to ice. Adiz lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The very thing that made her who she was, the thing Chaik once admired, he now hated. She felt like a bird with clipped wings, forced to sing in a cage built out of love. But that moment by the boy's side had changed her. Deep inside her chest, a fire had been relit. And though she didn't yet know how or when, she made a silent vow that night. She would never fully abandon who she was again. Not for love. Not for peace. Not even for a man she once believed she saved. Because somewhere between resignation and rejection, Adiz realized something horrifying. She had saved Chaik's life, but in the process, she was losing her own. Adiz had always known that marriages changed over time, but she never imagined how much hers would erode her identity. Each morning began the same way. She'd make breakfast while Chaik was on a conference call, serve it while he barely looked up, and clean it up while he scrolled through his phone. She had become invisible, just a fixture in the mansion, like a chandelier or curtain. At first, she made excuses. He's tired, maybe he's just under pressure. But when she tried to initiate conversations about the clinic, about going back to school, even about starting a women's health NGO, Chaik shut her down each time. "You're not thinking straight," he'd say. "You're trying to compete with me now." That stung more than any slap. It wasn't that she needed validation. She just wanted her voice back. But Chaik didn't just silence her. He invalidated her very being, turning her dreams into insults and her opinions into disrespect. The gaslighting deepened. When Adiz brought up how lonely she felt or how she missed being useful, Chaik would sneer. "You? Lonely? In this house I built? With food, a car, luxury? You're ungrateful, Adiz." He began referring to himself as her savior, reminding her that he took her out of that hospital stress and gave her a life most women dreamed of. "You wanted to work yourself to death like your colleagues? Look at how relaxed and glowing you are now," he'd say. But Adiz wasn't glowing. She was decaying. The silence in the house had grown so loud that she began journaling again, just to have something listen back. Her entries were no longer reflections. They were cries for help. Her pen ink bled phrases like, "I feel erased, and this house is a mansion, but it feels like a coffin." Still, she stayed. Not because she was weak, but because she hadn't yet figured out how to walk away from someone she once saved. Even the staff in the house began to notice the shift. The cook, Mom Nkechi, once asked quietly, "Madam, are you okay? You look dimmer." Adiz just smiled and shook her head. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. At night, she lay beside Chaik like a ghost beside a stranger. He'd turn his back, mumble a good night, and fall asleep. There were no more kisses on her forehead. No prayers. No intimacy. He began coming home later and later, blaming traffic or meetings. Once, she smelled unfamiliar perfume on his shirt. Another time, she found a diamond bracelet in his car that wasn't hers. But when she confronted him, he exploded. "You've become paranoid, Adiz. Boredom is making you delusional." That night, Adiz curled up in the guest room, holding her old stethoscope. It was the only thing in the house that reminded her of who she used to be. And as the moonlight washed over her teary face, she realized the man she once saw as her answered prayer had slowly become the prison she couldn't escape from. The confrontation happened on a Wednesday evening, one that started out like any other. Chaik claimed he had a late-night business meeting and wouldn't be home for dinner. Adiz, used to the routine by now, simply nodded and returned to her solitude. But a call from her old medical school friend, Kamsi, changed everything. "I saw Chaik," Kamsi said. "He wasn't at a meeting, Adiz. He was at Nuba Lounge with another woman." Adiz's heart froze. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Absolutely," Kamsi replied. "She was wearing a red dress. They were holding hands, laughing. He even kissed her." It was as if someone had taken a blade and sliced through Adiz's lungs. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. But rather than cry, she dressed up, called a cab, and told herself she needed to see it with her own eyes. Not because she didn't trust Kamsi, but because she needed the final crack to shatter the glass illusion she'd been living in. She arrived quietly and watched from across the room. And there he was, her husband, in a crisp white shirt, laughing like a boy who'd never known responsibility. The woman in red leaned close, twirling her wine glass, running her fingers along his arm. Adiz didn't make a scene. She didn't storm in or throw drinks. She simply watched, observed, memorized. And in that stillness, she felt something inside her die, but not her dignity. No, that remained. What died was the last ounce of denial, the belief that maybe Chaik was just overwhelmed, that he would come back to her if she prayed harder, loved harder, waited longer. She took out her phone and took a photo, just one. Proof. Not for the world, but for her own sanity. When she got home, she stared at it for hours. Then she wrote in her journal, "He doesn't even bother to hide her. Because he stopped seeing me a long time ago." The next day, Adiz didn't confront him. She didn't scream. She simply placed his lunch on the table, kissed him on the cheek, and whispered, "Your meeting must have gone well." He blinked, confused, but said nothing. That night, he came home late again. No explanation. No apology. Just silence. Adiz, however, had made up her mind. She would no longer beg for affection or prove her worth. Her self-respect, though bruised, was not dead. She began preparing quietly, not for war, but for release. She started visiting the clinic again, secretly, volunteering where her hands were still needed. She began updating her CV, reviewing medical journals, and setting money aside from her allowance. Because something had shifted. Adiz no longer wanted to save the marriage. She wanted to save herself. And though she didn't yet know when the final break would come, she could feel it inching closer, like a storm rising behind a calm sky. The final fight wasn't loud at first. It started with silence, the kind that lingered after weeks of unresolved tension. Chaik walked into the house one night with a scent that wasn't his. He dropped his keys on the table and muttered, "There's no food." Adiz looked up from the couch, tired, emotionally drained. "You didn't say you were coming home for dinner," he scoffed. "Do I need to start giving you daily schedules now?" She stood slowly. "Chaik, stop talking to me like I'm one of your employees." He turned, eyes blazing. "You should be grateful you even get to live in this house. Useless. Lazy. All you do is sit around and wrapper like an overfed goat." That was it. Something in Adiz snapped. She dropped the remote in her hand and took a deep breath. "You don't get to insult me like that. Not after everything I gave up. Not after I saved your life." The moment she said it, Chaik's face darkened. "Save my life? Oh, please. You act like that surgery gives you the right to control me forever. Newsflash, Adiz, you're not special. You're just a woman who got lucky enough to marry me." Adiz blinked. It was the first time he'd ever thrown that surgery back at her with venom. I left my career for you, Chike. I gave you peace, support, my entire self. But he interrupted, voice rising. And what did I get in return? A boring, clingy housewife who does nothing but nag. You're dead weight, Adiz. You contribute nothing. You don't even turn me on anymore. The slap never came, not from his hand, but from his words. They landed with more violence than fists ever could. Her knees buckled. And as she stood there trembling, he walked into their room, returned with a small bag, and began stuffing her things inside it. Get out. Go stay with those your useless parents, since you want to act like a victim. Then he did something she would never forget. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a crumpled $20 note, and tossed it at her feet like she was trash. Here, take this. At least you'll eat today, or buy yourself some dignity. The note fluttered to the floor, and Adiz stared at it, numb. Her world didn't just break that night, it collapsed. She picked up the money, not because she needed it, but because it was the final proof of who he truly was. She walked out of the house with no shoes, her bag dragging behind her, her heart bleeding with every step. The street was quiet, but her mind was screaming. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that she couldn't go back, and that somehow, this $20 that was meant to disgrace her would become the seed of something no one, not even Chike, would ever be able to take from her again. The sky was already turning gray when Adiz stepped onto the roadside with her bag clutched to her chest. She wore a simple wrapper over her nightgown, and the $20 bill was still clenched tightly in her palm, damp with the sweat of humiliation. Cars drove past without slowing, their horns indifferent to her pain. Her phone had just 3% battery left, and her pride had even less. She thought of calling her parents, but changed her mind. They had warned her. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, "Don't lose yourself trying to be someone's wife." And now, in the silence of her disgrace, Adiz felt like every warning she ignored had returned to collect. With trembling hands, she dialed the only person who wouldn't judge her, her old friend, Kamsi. When Kamsi heard her voice, broken and hollow, she didn't ask questions. "Send me your location," she said. "I'm on my way." That one sentence wrapped around Adiz like a lifeline. Kamsi's apartment was small, cozy, and filled with the scent of burnt toast and lavender. It was a world away from the marble floors and chandeliers Adiz had known. But it was warm, and that night warmth was a luxury. She took a long shower, trying to wash the insult off her skin, but the memory of Chike's voice wouldn't leave her. "Dead weight, take this $20. She had faced death before, faced blood and trauma in surgery rooms, but nothing compared to the humiliation of being thrown out like trash by the man she had given everything for. As she lay on the couch, wrapped in a throw blanket, she stared at the crumpled $20 on the table and thought bitterly, this is what 7 years of love and sacrifice came down to, a torn note and a slammed door. Kamsi tried to cheer her up with jokes, but Adiz just nodded silently, her heart too heavy to laugh. The next morning, they went out for groceries. Adiz had no appetite, but Kamsi insisted she needed fresh air. At the checkout counter, as Kamsi paid for their items, Adiz noticed a bright lottery poster beside the counter that read, "One ticket could change your life." She scoffed under her breath, but something, desperation or fate, nudged her. With trembling fingers, she reached into her bag, pulled out the $20 bill, and asked the cashier for a ticket. "You sure?" the woman asked, surprised. Adiz nodded. "Yeah, why not?" It wasn't hope that made her buy it. It was emptiness. The kind of emptiness that made you do something reckless just to feel like you still existed. She stuffed the ticket in her purse and forgot about it. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling fan blade spinning above her, she had no idea that the worthless piece of paper under her pillow would be the thing that turned her story around forever. It was 2 days later when the announcement came. Adiz had just finished sweeping Kamsi's small living room, trying to make herself feel useful, when she heard Kamsi scream from the kitchen. "Adiz! Come now," she yelled. Adiz rushed in, heart pounding, thinking something terrible had happened. But Kamsi stood frozen in front of the small TV screen, pointing with trembling fingers. The winning numbers, she gasped. They just read the winning numbers for the state lottery. Check your ticket, please. Adi's hands shook as she reached for her purse, unsure whether to laugh or cry. She hadn't even looked at the numbers when she bought it. She pulled the ticket out, unfolded it slowly, and stared at the sequence. Her breath caught. One number matched. Then two. Then three. Her knees gave way as Kamsi screamed again. Oh my God, Adiz. You just won $5 million. The room spun around her. 5 million. Her mouth opened, but no words came. It felt like a prank from a universe. Some cruel joke meant to make her fall harder. But the numbers didn't lie. She double-checked them, triple-checked them. The ticket was real. The news anchors confirmed it. Her name wasn't public yet because she hadn't claimed it, but the store location matched, and the amount was undeniable. Adiz collapsed on the floor, both laughing and crying. How could one night of shame turn into this? The $20 Chaik had thrown at her like garbage had turned into a ticket of freedom. But her joy was laced with disbelief. Why now, God, she whispered. Why not before he broke me? Kamsi hugged her tightly, both of them weeping, overwhelmed. That night, Adiz didn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because for the first time in years, she felt a power in her bones that she thought she'd buried with her white coat. The following morning, Adiz called a lawyer before even claiming the prize. She needed guidance. She didn't want a parade or media frenzy. She didn't want Chaik to know. I want to collect it quietly, and I want it protected, she told the lawyer. He helped her file under a trust, opened multiple accounts in her name under pseudonyms, and created legal shields so no one, not even her own relatives, could access the money without her permission. It wasn't just about wealth. It was about control. For the first time, Adiz had it. As she sat alone in a bank office signing documents, her eyes welled up. This was what Chaik feared most, not her success, but her independence. And now she had it. Not because he gave it, but because he threw it away. Fate had simply picked it up and handed it back with interest. The chapter of begging was over. The chapter of rising had just begun. Chaik was at his office when he heard the news. A colleague barged into his office, holding a phone, laughter bubbling on his lips. Guy, you won't believe this gist. Remember that $5 million jackpot from 2 days ago? Chaik looked up, bored. What about it? The man flipped the screen toward him. They just released partial footage from the store's CCTV, and bro, your ex-wife, Adiz, was the one who bought it. Chaik blinked, confused. Adiz. The laughter stopped. His heart skipped. He grabbed the phone and replayed the clip. It was blurry but unmistakable. Adiz in her wrapper, buying the ticket with the exact $20 he had thrown at her. His stomach turned. The room suddenly felt too hot. He dropped the phone and stood up. You're joking, he muttered. But it wasn't a joke. And as reality sank in, so did regret, the thick, suffocating kind. Adiz, the woman he discarded, was now a multi-millionaire because of him. He left work early, sweating despite the air conditioning in his car. He couldn't stop thinking about that night, the insults, the bag, the crumpled bill. God, what have I done? He muttered, gripping the wheel. He had laughed when she left, told his side chick it was good riddance, even blocked Adiz's number, thinking she'd come crawling back or be too ashamed to speak. Now she had something even he couldn't buy back, dignity, power, the kind of power that made men beg. He arrived at her parents' house first, pretending to check in. They looked at him with confusion and mild disgust. We haven't seen her, her father said coldly. Maybe if you hadn't treated her like trash, you'd know where your wife is. Chaik left, tail between his legs. By the time he returned to his own house, he couldn't sleep. He paced the marble floors, replaying her silent departure, the look in her eyes. She hadn't just walked away. She had vanished with the last piece of his humanity. 2 days later, Chaik called Kamsi, pretending to be concerned. I just want to check on Adiz, he lied. I made a mistake. I realize that now. But Kamsi wasn't moved. You made a lot of mistakes. She's doing fine. That's all you need to know. When Chaik hung up, his face twisted with desperation. She won't shut me out. She can't. I gave her that money, he told himself. He convinced himself that he still had a right to her windfall, that since the $20 came from him, part of it was technically his. We were still married, he told his friend, and that money was a gift, or maybe even community property. His voice grew louder with each excuse, as if he could shout his guilt into logic. But beneath all the bravado was fear, pure, burning fear. Because Chaik was beginning to understand something Adiz had already known. Money doesn't make a man. Integrity does. And that was something he'd long thrown away. Chaik stood at the gate of Kamsi's compound like a stranger begging for shelter. He was dressed in his finest senator wear, his shoes shined to perfection, his face moisturized and set in a practiced mask of remorse. But beneath the surface, he was a volcano of panic. His company was under financial pressure. 2 of his largest clients had pulled out, and his other woman had ghosted him the moment Adiz's lottery win went viral. Now, with nothing left but pride and desperation, he came knocking. When Kamsi opened the door, she didn't even greet him. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. Chaik smiled nervously. "I just want to see her. Please." Kamsi folded her arms. "You kicked her out like a dog and gave her $20 like a beggar. You think she'll want to see you now." But just then, Adiz appeared at the corridor behind Kamsi, clothed in a plain blue gown, her natural hair packed into a bun, her skin glowing without makeup. And her silence hit Chaik harder than any insult. He stepped forward, voice shaking with practiced humility. "Adiz, baby, I came to apologize. I made a terrible mistake. I was stressed, confused. I didn't mean to hurt you." She didn't move. She didn't smile. Her eyes, once soft and forgiving, were sharp now, trained by betrayal. "Why are you here?" she asked. He chuckled weakly, lowering his head like a scolded child. "Because I realized I let go of the best thing that ever happened to me. I've missed you, Adiz. I was stupid. Please, just give me another chance." Kamsi scoffed from behind her, but Adiz raised a hand to silence her. "So now that I'm worth $5 million, I suddenly became the best thing?" she asked softly. Her voice was calm, but her words were thunder. Chaik blinked. No. It's not about the money. It's about us." Adiz smiled bitterly. "There is no us. There hasn't been for a long time. But go on. Say what you came to say." And then he said it, the sentence that sealed his fate. "Since I gave you the $20, and you used it to buy the ticket, don't you think I deserve a part of it?" Silence filled the compound. Kamsi gasped. Adiz laughed, but it wasn't joy. It was the laugh of a woman finally free of illusion. "You really think your insult was an investment?" she asked. "You didn't give me that $20 with kindness. You threw it at me like trash. You mocked me. And now you want to claim credit." Chaik's smile cracked. "I'm not asking for much. Just half. We were married. That counts for something, right?" Adiz stepped forward slowly until they were just inches apart. "You're right, Chaik. We were married. But while I was building you up, you were breaking me down. While I was sacrificing, you were cheating. While I was dreaming, you were discarding. So no, you don't get to benefit from what you tried to destroy." She turned around and walked back inside. Chaik stood frozen at the gate, finally realizing the truth. He was no longer a husband begging for forgiveness. He was a beggar staring at the gate of grace that had closed forever. The drama exploded online like wildfire. Someone who had overheard the encounter at Kamsi's compound had secretly recorded it on their phone and posted it to social media. The clip of Chaik asking for half of the $5 million because he gave Adiz the $20 bill went viral within hours. The hashtags #$20 husband and #she deserves it trended across platforms. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everyone had an opinion. Some called Chaik shameless. Others argued he had a legal right. But the majority rallied behind Adiz, praising her strength, her composure, and her clapback. Memes flooded the internet. Adiz's face was edited onto queen thrones, while Chaik was depicted holding a torn $20 bill with a broken crown. News outlets picked up the story. Blogs reposted old photos from their wedding, comparing them to the current mess. And Adiz, though shaken, remained silent, choosing her dignity over digital retaliation. Inside, however, she was hurting. Not because of Chaik's entitlement, but because of how much of herself she had lost in that marriage. The attention felt overwhelming. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Journalists waited outside Campsey's gate. Friends she hadn't heard from in years reached out. Her parents called every day, urging her to come home. But Adiz wasn't ready to return to her old life. Not yet. She needed time to heal in private. She met with her lawyer again, who advised her to prepare for anything. If he's already talking about entitlement, he may file a legal suit, the lawyer warned. Be ready. Adiz nodded, already anticipating the next move. It wasn't enough for Chaik to break her. He now wanted to profit from the ashes. But what he didn't know was that she was no longer the woman who begged for respect. She was now the woman people looked up to, the symbol of silent resilience, not out of vengeance, but to protect every woman who had ever been told her worth was disposable. Sure enough, within days, Chaik filed a lawsuit. His lawyers claimed that Adiz's winnings were community property, citing the fact that they were still legally married when the ticket was purchased. The lawsuit leaked online, triggering another storm. The public divided into two camps, Team Adiz and Team Chaik. Debates broke out on radio shows, podcasts, and WhatsApp groups. Does the man deserve half? Some asked. Or is this just another greedy ex trying to claim credit for a woman's miracle? Adiz refused to give interviews. Instead, she let her actions speak. Her lawyer issued a single press statement. Mrs. Adiz Madhu is prepared to defend her rights. This lawsuit is not just about money, it's about principle. And with that, the war moved from social media to the courtroom. But Adiz knew this was no longer about proving Chaik wrong. It was about reclaiming everything he tried to bury, one truth at a time. The courtroom was cool, with high ceilings and dusty blinds that filtered sunlight like a judgmental eye. Adiz sat in silence as her lawyer flipped through thick folders filled with documents, printouts, timestamps, and legal precedents. This case is emotional, he said, his voice calm but firm. But we must be surgical with our defense. You won't win this on sympathy, you'll win it on facts. Adiz nodded. She wore a simple navy gown and tied her hair back in a low bun. She wasn't here to impress. She was here to win. The irony of it all wasn't lost on her. She used to stand in operating rooms, saving lives. Now she stood in a courtroom trying to save her own. Chaik sat across the room with his lawyer, wearing a tailored gray suit and a smug expression that Adiz once mistook for charm. He kept stealing glances at her, as if still trying to read the woman he could no longer manipulate. The legal argument was complex. Chaik's lawyer argued that the $20, despite being given insultingly, still legally counted as a marital asset since they were not divorced at the time. He claimed Adiz owed her newfound wealth to the support and sacrifices made during the course of their marriage. The irony was thick. Chaik had sacrificed nothing. He had insulted, belittled, and discarded her. But now, in the eyes of the law, everything needed to be proven with evidence. Adiz's lawyer came prepared. He presented journals Adiz had written during the marriage, entries that detailed emotional abuse, isolation, and manipulation. He presented bank statements showing that Chaik controlled all finances. He presented photos, audio clips, and even the viral video where Chaik demanded just half. It wasn't just about defending her winnings. It was about painting a full picture of a woman who had been silenced for too long. After the hearing, the lawyer turned to Adiz and said quietly, "We have a strong case. But you need to be ready emotionally. They'll try to shame you, spin your words, question your decisions." Adiz nodded slowly. "They've already done worse than shame me. I just need to finish what I started." That night, she stood in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection. She didn't see the same woman who once stood there trembling after being kicked out. She saw someone rising, someone whole. "He thought he was throwing me away," she whispered, "but he was planting me. And now, I've grown into something he can't uproot." The trial date was set. The world was watching. But Adiz didn't need the world's sympathy. All she needed was her truth. And that she had finally reclaimed. The courtroom was filled with tension that morning as Adiz took the witness stand. The eyes of the world seemed to rest on her, not with pity, but with expectation. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the whispers outside were loud enough to rattle the windows. Adiz sat upright, hands folded in her lap, her face calm but resolute. She was not here to perform. She was here to testify, to speak the truth that had lived unspoken inside her for years. When her lawyer asked her to describe the nature of her marriage to Chaik, the room fell silent. Adiz took a deep breath, glanced at the judge, and began. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She told the story as it was, unflinchingly. How she met Chaik, how she saved his life, how he promised to protect hers, and how slowly, insidiously, he began to break her. I gave up a thriving career in medicine for him, she said, her voice clear. Not because I lacked ambition, but because I believed in his. I thought marriage was about sacrifice. I thought if I gave him peace, he'd give me support. Instead, I became invisible in my own home. I wasn't a partner, I was an accessory. When I tried to reconnect with my passion, he called me disobedient. When I asked for respect, he called me lazy. And the final insult. She paused, her eyes drifting to Chaik, who sat fidgeting in his chair. He threw $20 at me like I was a beggar. That same money became the seed of my restoration. Not because of him, but in spite of him. The courtroom murmured. Her lawyer smiled slightly, but Adiz wasn't finished. I am not on trial for being lucky. I am here because someone who broke me now wants to benefit from my survival. That is not justice. Her words didn't just echo, they roared. The judge leaned forward. Even the opposing counsel hesitated. For the first time, Chaik looked genuinely uncomfortable, not because he was being accused, but because Adiz had found her voice again, and it didn't tremble. When her testimony ended, the courtroom broke into spontaneous applause until the judge called for order. Reporters outside scribbled furiously, some weeping. In a single sitting, Adiz had redefined the case. It wasn't just about a lottery ticket, it was about entitlement, erasure, and reclamation. That night, social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag her voice was heard. Hashtag Adiz speaks. And hashtag not your money. And Adiz, alone in her room, finally allowed herself to cry, not from pain, but from the relief of no longer carrying the weight of silence. The world had heard her. More importantly, she had heard herself. And no matter how the judge ruled, she had already won a victory that no court could overturn. The next day, it was the defense's turn to present their case. Chaik's lawyer, now visibly less confident, tried to spin a narrative of marital contribution. Mr. Madhu, the lawyer said, supported the household financially. He provided stability, comfort, and access to luxury. These contributions enabled Mrs. Madhu the freedom to buy that ticket. Without his $20, there would be no $5 million. The argument sounded logical on paper, but in the room filled with witnesses who had seen Adiz's testimony the day before, it fell flat. When it was Adiz's lawyer's turn to cross-examine, he stepped forward with a box of evidence labeled receipts of betrayal. He began pulling out photo enlargements, printed WhatsApp messages, and audio clips of past arguments between Adiz and Chaik. Painful, but undeniable proof of cruelty, neglect, and mental abuse. One audio clip played in the courtroom sent shivers down every spine present. It was Chaik's voice yelling, "You're just a lazy woman in a big house. If I wanted someone with purpose, I wouldn't have married you." Adiz didn't flinch. She had already lived through the moment. The court listened as Chaik insulted her education, called her ungrateful, and mocked her dreams. Then came the final exhibit, security footage from a neighbor's CCTV on the night he kicked her out. The grainy black and white clip showed Adiz walking out of the compound, holding a bag barefoot, while Chaik tossed something to the ground behind her and slammed the gate. The room gasped. That was the $20, her lawyer explained. That was the moment he turned her into a beggar. And now he wants to claim her miracle as compensation. Even the judge's face hardened. For the first time, the court wasn't just seeing a legal case. They were witnessing a pattern of abuse. Chaik tried to defend himself when he took the stand. He stammered through his testimony, claiming the recordings were taken out of context, and that Adiz was never really interested in the marriage. But his tone was defensive, his words inconsistent. He couldn't explain the text messages where he bragged to friends about being finally rid of that deadweight. He couldn't deny the date-stamped photos of him vacationing with his mistress, while Adiz was sleeping on a couch. The more he spoke, the deeper he dug his hole. By the end of the day, the judge called for a recess and instructed both parties to prepare for closing statements. As they left the courtroom, Adiz passed by Chaik with calm grace. He couldn't look her in the eye, and for once he didn't have anything smug to say. His shame had finally arrived, late but loud. The final day in court arrived like a funeral procession, solemn, tense, and thick with anticipation. Journalists stood outside with cameras and microphones, whispering to each other about how this case had turned into a national reckoning. The gallery was full. Strangers who had never met Adiz sat shoulder to shoulder with activists, lawyers, and even a few celebrities who had spoken out in support of her. She entered in a white gown, symbolic of the woman she used to be when she first married Chaik, pure, full of hope, unbroken. Her face held no anger, only quiet dignity. Chaik sat beside his legal team, his eyes bloodshot, the suit he wore wrinkled with stress. He looked smaller, like a man finally realizing that arrogance was not armor, it was decay. As the judge entered, silence dropped like a gavel across the room. The judgment was read slowly, every word etched into history. This court finds that the lottery winnings, while purchased during the marriage, do not constitute community property, the judge declared. The nature of the transaction, the emotional circumstances surrounding it, and the lack of any marital contribution at the time deem the $20 as a personal gift with no entitlement beyond its face value. The court ruled in Adiz's favor. She would retain 100% of her winnings. The $20, the court noted, had not been given in love, but in scorn, thus disqualifying any moral or legal claim. There were no cheers, no clapping. Just a long breath of justice exhaled across the courtroom. Adiz blinked away tears, not because of the money, but because finally a system had believed her, validated her, protected her. As she stepped outside, the press swarmed. Adiz, what would you like to say to women going through what you went through? One reporter shouted. She paused, turned to face the cameras, and said softly, "Don't measure your worth by the hands that couldn't hold you. Sometimes, the same people who throw you away are the ones who unknowingly fund your breakthrough." Then she walked to her car, head held high. Behind her, Chaik stood alone, surrounded by silence and shame. No one wanted a quote from him. No one wanted to know how he felt. He had gone to court to claim wealth, but what he lost was greater. He lost his last shred of respect, and in the pages of public opinion, his name had become a cautionary tale, not of a man who was wronged, but of a man who mistook abuse for entitlement. And Adiz? She was no longer just a millionaire. She was a symbol. Months had passed since the court's verdict, but Adiz hadn't disappeared into luxury the way gossip blogs had expected. She didn't flee the country, buy a mansion in Dubai, or drown in designer labels. Instead, she stayed in Nigeria and quietly channeled her energy into something bigger than revenge. With a portion of her winnings, she launched a non-profit foundation called Dignity First, a safe space for women who had been emotionally, financially, or psychologically abused in marriage. The launch event was modest, held at a women's center in Yaba, with no red carpet, no champagne towers, no celebrity hosts, just women with stories, pain, and courage. Adiz stood at the front in a white gown, symbolizing rebirth, her natural hair pulled into a crown braid. She wasn't trying to inspire with rehearsed words. She simply told the truth. "I was once the woman begging for love," she said, "but now I fight so no woman ever feels like love should cost her her soul." The media showed up anyway, despite her not inviting them. Word had spread that Adiz, the woman who turned humiliation into healing, was giving back. One of the reporters asked her after the speech, "How do you feel when you see your name trending alongside stories of other women now using your case to speak out?" Adiz smiled, tears dancing in her eyes. "It's not about me anymore," she said. "It's about the woman who's sitting at home wondering if she's crazy because her husband keeps calling her lazy. It's about the one who left medicine for marriage and lost herself in the silence. I didn't just win a jackpot. I won my voice back, and I'm going to use it until I have nothing left to say." And with that, she stepped down from the podium and sat among the women she was there to uplift. There was no hierarchy, only healing. Back home that night, Adiz sat on her balcony, sipping tea as the night breeze kissed her cheeks. Her phone buzzed with hundreds of congratulatory messages, but one name on the screen made her pause. Chaik. She didn't answer. She didn't block him either. She just let the phone ring out. She wasn't angry. She had no more space in her heart for rage. What she felt now was closure, the kind that doesn't need confrontation. The man who once called her dead weight was now just a memory she no longer carried. She looked up at the stars and whispered a soft prayer of gratitude, not just for the money, but for the strength to endure what should have broken her. Somewhere inside, she knew that the greatest miracle wasn't the $5 million. It was the woman she had become without it. A woman who wore white not because she was pure, but because she had been through fire and didn't smell like smoke. Chaik was now a ghost of the man he used to be. After losing the court case, his business took a deeper dive. Investors pulled out, afraid of the PR nightmare his name now carried. His side chick, the one in the red dress, disappeared the moment he stopped booking luxury vacations. Even his own siblings, once eager to ride on his coattails, avoided him, ashamed of the mockery he had become. He had tried to relaunch his company, but found that doors no longer opened with the same ease. The press now referred to him not as entrepreneur Chaik Madhu, but as the ex-husband of Adiz. That was his identity now, his legacy. One night, as he sat alone in his empty house, surrounded by furniture that no longer felt like success, he scrolled through old photos of Adiz, the ones he used to ignore. In one, she was laughing in her scrubs, hands stained with ink, her joy untouched by his arrogance. That was the woman he destroyed. He tried to post online about lessons learned, pretending to be remorseful, but no one was interested. People had already chosen their hero, and it wasn't him. Occasionally, he would see Adiz's name on TV or in interviews, her foundation expanding, her voice empowering others. He'd switch off the TV each time, too ashamed to watch. He once tried to reach out again, sending a message that read, "I miss what we had. I'm sorry." Adiz saw the message. She read it twice. Then she deleted it without responding. Not because she was bitter, but because she was healed. Her forgiveness didn't mean a reunion. It meant freedom. She no longer needed closure from him. Her silence was closure enough. She had nothing left to prove. She had risen from his rejection, and now she walked in rooms he could no longer enter. What Chaik failed to realize was that some losses are irreversible, not because the person disappeared, but because they grew too far beyond your reach. One Saturday morning, Adiz drove past Chaik on the road without knowing he was there. Her tinted SUV glided past him as he stood by the sidewalk, looking worn, trying to hail a cab. He saw her car, recognized the plate, and froze. Inside the vehicle, Adiz was smiling, not because of wealth, but because she was on her way to deliver school kits to single mothers in a rural community. She didn't look back. She didn't know he was behind her. But even if she did, she wouldn't have stopped. Because some goodbyes are blessings. And sometimes, the same man who threw you out and gave you $20 ends up watching you drive past with grace, success, and a peace he will never know. She didn't win just the lottery. She won herself. And that was the kind of wealth no courtroom, no man, and no insult could ever take away. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.